Hey everyone. So today we are with Carly Hartwig, who is a holistic reproductive health practitioner and certified fertility awareness educator. She is with the account Clean Living with Carly on Instagram. Hey Carly.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm excited to chat.
Yes, I am very excited. And you are currently expecting baby two.
I am a few more months. It's crazy. Baby two is going by way faster than the first round, but getting very excited.
I was thinking back to when we had you in the private community for Moms Off the
hmm
Record to do the webinar there. And I was like, I wonder if she knew at that time whether she was pregnant.
Yeah, I don't actually know. I might have. I might have.
August.
Yeah, I might have. It was very hard to keep it a secret this time. I don't know. The first time around, I was like, I don't want to tell anyone. Like, this is the best. And now I'm like, I want to tell the world.
Yes, it's so exciting. It's so cool. And so your daughter will be what, about four when baby
Yep.
two arrives?
Yep. She's turning four just before.
Great, great.
Yeah,
Age
she's very
gaps.
excited and she definitely understands it. And I'm hoping she's going to be a helper. And yeah, we're very excited.
Oh yeah, no, I'm sure she definitely will. And okay, so I'm so excited because there's so much I want to ask you about, specifically about fertility awareness. Let's just dive right in and talk about natural cycles because I have heard of, and I know you talk about this all the time on your account,
I
but
do.
we were just talking that influencers are often saying how natural cycles is a good way to prevent pregnancy or plan pregnancy, but usually prevent pregnancy. But
hmm
then women end up getting pregnant using it. So can we just start with why is using an app alone like natural cycles not an appropriate way to actually prevent pregnancy?
It's one of my favorite things to talk about. And I always like to tell women, like, I fell for it too. The marketing is very powerful with natural cycles. And there are other apps out there that are similar, but natural cycles definitely has the biggest platform, I think. And they love to boast that they're FDA approved, non-hormonal birth control. So I think a lot of women like you and I who are mindful about what goes into our body, who perhaps, will never use hormonal birth control again, and we're on this kind of like more natural living journey. We hear this like non-hormonal birth control, no side effects, it's FDA approved, right? It has to be effective. So the marketing is very powerful, and I don't want people to feel bad for falling for it because I did. This
Mm.
was kind of my gateway into the world of fertility awareness. It was about almost 9 years ago now. Thankfully, about, 8, 9 months into using natural cycles, I just happened upon an account on Instagram from a fertility awareness educator, and she posted a carousel about natural cycles. And I tapped through it and I was like, crap, okay, well, I got to stop using this right away because at the time we were not planning on like starting our family anytime soon. So in a nutshell, natural cycles works supposedly by using your basal body temperature, which if your listeners don't know, your basal body temperature is your resting metabolic temperature. In the first half of your cycle, under the influence of estrogen, it's a little bit lower. After ovulation, when progesterone becomes our dominant hormone, that temperature rises, and it can be a subtle rise, but it's a sustained rise. And then that BBT will stay elevated for the rest of your cycle, dropping right before you get your period or when you get your period, or staying elevated if you do become pregnant with that cycle. So natural cycles is just a thermometer with a very expensive app attached to it. I know they've expanded. They now have a bracelet, I believe, which we can talk about why that's also not reliable. But what
Yeah.
they're doing is they're basically the rhythm method in like a technology form that's very expensive. So what they do is they take this temperature and say, okay, you have ovulated around day 15, for all these months. So you're probably going to ovulate again around day 15. And so they use your BBT to tell you if you have a green day or a red day, right? Red day means you're in your fertile window. You could get pregnant, so you should be abstaining from vaginal intercourse. Green means you're good to go.
Mm.
The problem is basal body temperature. It's a wonderful biomarker to track. It's what I personally have tracked as part of like my fertility awareness journey. However, it is a retroactive biomarker. It
Right.
confirms ovulation after it happens. Like I just said, your temperature will rise and it will stay elevated. Your BBT does not open your fertile window, and we have a fertile window biologically 6 days every cycle that can result in pregnancy because our cervical mucus can keep sperm alive for up to 5 days leading up to ovulation. So those 5 days plus the day that our egg is released, because it can be fertilized up to 24 hours, gives us a 6-day biological fertile window. However, we can never predict with certainty when we're going to ovulate, like full stop. I don't care how regular your cycles are. I don't care if you, quote unquote, always ovulate on the same day. It takes one cycle, just one cycle of not ovulating at the same time, quote unquote, to get pregnant. And that's exactly what happens with natural cycles, because again, it's using BBT to open your fertile window when BBT is not used to do that. It's used to confirm ovulation after it happens.
Can I stop you right there? Yes. I'm astounded with all the regulations. Like, I know you and I both use and love Temp Drop, and these they are medical devices and they're extremely regulated. I'm astounded that there aren't more laws around the verbiage used when marketing something like natural cycles. Do you know like the politics behind it? Like, how are they allowed to get away with this? How has this not been pulled from advertising?
Because they have a lot of studies that are very cherry picked and very manipulated, in my opinion, because what their efficacy studies don't take into account is the app error, and they will basically say it's user error, right? Wow. And so that won't factor into their efficacy studies. So all the FDA cares about is like, oh, look they have these studies that show I don't know what their current, maybe 99%, 98% effective at preventing unwanted pregnancy. Whatever it is, it's skewed. Do you know what I mean? Wow. And you know as well as I can that we can make numbers look how we want our numbers to look.
Absolutely.
So I believe that's probably why. But what happens is they will give you green days, right? Like typically after your period, you'll have some days where you're dry, you don't produce cervical mucus. So you could have unprotected intercourse that don't result in pregnancy. There's no chance of it resulting in pregnancy. However, you can also ovulate earlier than usual. As I said, we don't always ovulate on the same day. If you are super stressed, if you are sick, if you are traveling, if you're in a different time zone, even sometimes just the time change can impact things. So let's say you ovulate a little earlier. The app's not going to know because, again, we can't predict when we're going to ovulate. Yes. And so they're going to give you those green days right after your period, and you're going to go unprotected. And then a few days later, you're going to ovulate early, right? And the app is the algorithm, their fancy schmancy algorithm is going to be like, oh, shoot, okay, we're going to change that green day on, cycle day 7, 6. We're going to change it to a red day. Except if you already went unprotected, it's too late. And so that's what happens. So women will open the app and they'll be like, wait. that was a green day. And then all of a sudden it's a red day. And then boom, they're pregnant. And this is what I mean by the app and the studies saying, oh, that's user error, right? Because it's a red day, wow. Except it started out as a green day. And that's, again, because BBT does not open our fertile window. It closes it. Right. It doesn't open it.
Wow. Yeah, it's as simple as you cannot use BBT to predict ovulation. It's retroactive. No. You use it to confirm, did you actually ovulate?
Yes. And again, it's a wonderful tool for that because there are a lot of women out there, particularly women trying to get pregnant, who are like, oh yeah, I'm ovulating because I get a bleed every, 28, 30 days. But getting a bleed every 28, 30 days doesn't mean you're ovulating. So I love BBT. It's a wonderful, wonderful tool. The other issue is you have to be taking your temperature consistently after, 4 to 5 hours of uninterrupted sleep. You have to take it around the same time each morning. Their thermometer is digital, so it takes your temperature really quickly. You actually need to leave it in for about 3 to 5 minutes before you take the reading. So there's all these little nuances. And years ago, when I started learning this, I actually reached out to them. I think I must have commented on some influencer's post, and we ended up having a conversation in DMs, and they told me how, their studies were valid. And I was like, do you have any certified fertility awareness educators on your board, on your scientific team? Because they love to boast about that. And they don't. And to me, like, a certified fertility awareness educator is truly the expert here, and they don't have them.
It's probably
and of course, they don't have them. Right. They don't have them.
Like at Bobby.
Right. Exactly. And no certified fertility awareness educator in their right mind would support this. I can promise you that. So it's really scary. And what I love to tell women, because women love to DM me and they're like, well, I've used it for years and it's been great. And I always say, great. I'm so happy that this has worked for you. And also, I need you to know that there's no guarantee that it's going to keep working for you.
Correct. Like, that's called luck. So you got lucky for years. That's it. You can't bank on luck or hope.
You sure can't.
Right. So going back to like some cycles, you will bleed. It will look like you're having a period. You will not ovulate. I had that. That's common in postpartum.
Yep,
That's an
it is.
anovulatory cycle.
Mm-hmm.
So how are you going to know that intuitively? Well, yeah, sure. You can argue maybe if you don't experience ovulation pains, but you cannot confirm it with 100% certainty.
Right.
Wow. Okay. So natural cycles. So you mentioned it's the rhythm method, right? It's like a version of
Mm-hmm.
the rhythm method. So my mom went to nursing school in New York City in the 80s. She graduated, I think, in 86, I want to say, somewhere around then. She said that at the time, it was really interesting. The only education they got around birth control alternatives was when
Mm-hmm.
local nuns came from the Catholic Church in New York City
Yep.
to the nursing school. And what they taught was the rhythm method. So my mom, she's like scrunchy, but and she tries to avoid most pharmaceuticals, but it's not like, all or nothing.
Mm-hmm.
But when I first told her, because I discovered it was actually Daisy. That was the first app I discovered.
Yep.
And I don't use
Yep,
that
that's another
anymore.
one.
But when I first discovered that in like 2014, and I was telling her about it, I was so excited. I asked her because I was like, I had never heard of fertility awareness method.
Yeah.
Did you learn about this in nursing school? She said, oh, yeah, we learned that. It was the rhythm method. That's what we called it. I think that people, when things like natural cycles fail mothers and then they get pregnant, they're going to blame it on the fertility awareness method and say, see, that didn't work. I should have taken hormonal birth control, or my husband should have gotten a vasectomy, right? We are confusing the rhythm method with fertility awareness method. Simply put, what's the difference?
So the rhythm method is you take a calendar, you say, okay, I get my period on March 1st. It lasts for 5 days. I'm going to assume that I ovulate on day 14 because that's what we've been taught. Except, spoiler alert, less than 10% of women on any given cycle will ovulate on day 14. But that's what the rhythm method is. So it's March, we start on March 1st, we ovulate on March 14th, and we're going to get our period again on March 29th and have this perfect clockwork 28-day cycle, which again, less than 10% of women have at any given time. So you're literally just looking at a calendar and assuming very incorrectly that your cycles are always going to be the same. You're always going to ovulate on the same day, which again, ovulation is wildly sensitive to environmental stressors. We are not robots. We could ovulate on the same day for 6 months in a row, 6 years in a row, and then boom, we ovulate early, we ovulate late. So true fertility awareness methods. So the term fertility awareness method, it's really more of an umbrella term that refers to standardized and scientific methods that use your fertile biomarkers to identify your fertile window each cycle. These are used in real time. So we're not assuming that we're always going to ovulate on the same day. We're actually looking at the data in real time. There are symptothermal methods, which is what I personally use and teach. That involves tracking your cervical mucus, which is, again, your real-time sign of fertility. It opens your fertile window. And also your BBT, which again is wonderful and confirms ovulation each cycle. There are symptohormonal methods where you're tracking your cervical mucus. So cervical mucus is part of every method because it is so important. And then you're also using like an at-home like fertility device, like Clear Blue, things like that. So you're looking at like your urine metabolites. And then there are also cervical mucus only methods where that's all you're tracking. And what all of these methods are teaching you are standardized rules to open and close your fertile window. And these rules can be used no matter what your goals are. They can be used to avoid pregnancy. And some of these methods are up to like 99.6% effective, which is even better than a lot of forms of hormonal birth control. Mm-hmm. They can also be used to increase your chances of getting pregnant. There are some really compelling studies out there showing that when you are tracking your fertile signs to time intercourse correctly, we call it focused intercourse, that you do get pregnant faster, which is really cool. You can also just use these methods for like body literacy. So if you're not trying to achieve or you're not trying to avoid, perhaps your partner did get a vasectomy, which sadly is becoming more common. And I just wish more people would do a little bit more research on it.
I can't wait to dive into that with you.
I think we just kind of look at it like the easy option and then, you don't have to take birth control. But I always tell women, even if that's the case, right? Or, maybe you got your tubes tied, like whatever it is, you can still use these methods to improve your body literacy to know exactly when your period is coming, to know when you're ovulating, confirm that you're ovulating, because remember, your menstrual cycle is your fifth vital sign. It is a free report card of your health every month. What was cool for me before I got pregnant was I was charting my transition into perimenopause. And perimenopause can be a very long, 10 to 15 year process. There's 4 different stages that are involved. In the first stage, the most common symptom is cycle irregularities. And that was what was happening to me. I had no other rhyme and reason why all of a sudden I started ovulating really late. My cycles got really long. So that was kind of cool too.
Yeah.
So it really is, you learn one method and then you have this gift of body literacy for the rest of your reproductive life, whatever your goals are. So those are true fertility awareness methods. There are a lot of them out there. You have to just kind of decide, like, what do I want to track? I had no interest in peeing on a stick and tracking with like a hormone device at home. And some women love that, and that's fine. I love doing my BBT because I like to nerd out on the data. I like to see that shift every month. And obviously I track my cervical mucus because that's our real-time sign of fertility. So fertility awareness methods, there's lots of them out there, but they are absolutely not synonymous with the rhythm method. And there also are secular and non-secular ones.
Right.
If your listeners have heard of like natural family planning, that is a very popular approach to a fertility awareness method through the Catholic Church. It's taught through the Catholic Church, and it is very legitimate.
Okay, so natural family planning should not be lumped in with the rhythm method, correct?
No, they're two very different things. Yeah.
Okay, so you teach the Justisse method, right?
Mm-hmm.
Can you explain for us what is the Billings, Marquette, and Justisse method, and why did you choose Justisse?
So Billings is a very popular cervical mucus only method. Marquette is a very popular symptohormonal method where you're using that at-home fertility device. And Justisse, the reason that I was kind of pulled towards that program is it was a symptothermal or cervical mucus only method. So I liked that I was learning 2 different approaches, because for some women, they might go through seasons of life where they want to track their baby T, and then there might be seasons of life where they don't. And so it's kind of cool that I have that flexibility. But what really drew me to the program was that I was graduating as a holistic reproductive health practitioner as well as a certified fertility awareness educator. So I could really become an expert in women's hormone health, cycle health. So if I have a client and we're tracking and we see that, they're continuing to have excessively long cycles, or they're having a lot of cycles where they're not ovulating and we can't figure out why, it's not like they're postpartum or they're breastfeeding, I can help them kind of work through that holistically, which I really, really enjoyed. So that's really what drew me to the program. Marquette is great. Billings is great. I know a lot of postpartum women especially enjoy Billings because it's only cervical mucus and it has a very strong postpartum protocol. I have used the Justisse method now for many, many years, both to get pregnant and to avoid pregnancy and to chart the return of my fertility postpartum, which happened really quickly. Even though I was exclusively breastfeeding, co-sleeping, contact napping, all the things, it was kind of comical how fast I ovulated postpartum. But yeah.
Around 2 months postpartum, right?
2.5, yep. And then I got my period at 3 months. So.
Thank goodness you had the knowledge about fertility awareness method. Because I sent you recently, I think I sent you, there's a reel or post, there's an influencer who just got pregnant with her 5th baby at around 3 months postpartum. Oof. Wild.
It's so scary.
I mean, I'm a 1.5 years postpartum with my 2nd. I cannot imagine being pregnant right now, but I was thinking like, oh my God, this time with my son, when he was 1.5 years old, that's when I got pregnant with my daughter. And for some people, that's a piece of cake. And for me, looking back, that was still too soon.
Yeah.
It's taboo to say that, but it was, there's still like
wild.
babies. But okay, I have to dive into perimenopause with you. There's some infighting in the holistic world, especially online, about whether perimenopause is actually even real.
Oh my goodness, stop.
Right?
What?
We have to talk. Have you not seen this?
I have not seen that. This is not the algorithm I live in.
Okay, I live on like both sides of the algorithm, and I see basically all the polarized stuff at the same time.
Interesting.
So, okay, I will give the archetype of the person, of the woman. There's a few women. It's a certain archetype of like a very athletic or fit woman who like has either no kids or much older children.
Okay. But
definitely exercise is at the forefront. And they're claiming that perimenopause, like you can have it's not a thing. Like some of them are just saying it doesn't exist. Menopause is real, but perimenopause doesn't exist. That's what they're claiming. And that in order to avoid all symptoms in menopause, it's about like eating a certain way and like lifting heavy things. Is this true?
I would respectfully say no. I'm a big fan of women nourishing their bodies, eating well. I can't think of a single client I've had who's eating enough, especially when it comes to
Right.
like protein, healthy fats. So big fan of women eating enough. Huge fan of women lifting weights, especially as we age. Starting at 30, we start to lose our lean body mass and our muscle mass. And so we
Yes.
want to protect that as we age. Big fan, lift heavy things, put them down. But no, perimenopause is very much real. And what I see from my perspective is like women are owning it, women are talking about it, and women are done suffering in silence for
Yeah.
years and years and years leading up to menopause. There's almost this resurgence happening, at least from my perspective, where women are like, okay, we're going to claim this, we're going to talk about it, and we're going to find some evidence-based solutions so that we are not miserable with mood swings and hot flashes, and crazy insomnia for 10 years of our life. So
Yes.
from my perspective, perimenopause is very well documented in the
Yeah.
research and the literature because we do see these shifts in our hormones. And you could have the healthiest hormones in the world and take care of yourself and nourish yourself and work out, and you're still going to see these shifts. Now, what I will say is it's not always a decade, or a 15-year process. For some women, it's less. Most women on average go through menopause, which remember, menopause is defined as 12 months without a period. So that's the difference. They go through it around age 50. If you happen to know when your mom went through menopause, that can give you kind of a good idea of when you will likely go through menopause. And then when we think about perimenopause, it's that transition leading up to that. So it can start very subtly. Like I mentioned, it can just be some changes with your cycle, getting a little bit longer, right? Typically having more delayed ovulation. And then a lot of the other symptoms start. And there are at least 30 documented symptoms that most providers are on par with. There are some studies that actually have found that number is closer to 100. And it can be really obscure things: frozen shoulder, restless legs, eczema, the random insomnia. So I think we assume it's like the hot flashes, right? And that comes typically a little bit later. So it starts with the changes in our cycle. Then we start to see some of these symptoms. Then we actually start to see our cycles shorten. We don't always ovulate, so more of those anovulatory cycles. And then we start to see skipping periods, skipping cycles. And then we have that full year without. And then we are officially in menopause. Now, what I will say is there's some interesting research that's kind of starting to emerge around the benefits of trying to delay menopause. I don't know if you've seen any of this. I read a really cool research brief that one of my instructors from Justisse sent out about how there's actually benefit to cycling longer, which is really interesting, and how menopause has gotten earlier and earlier, just like, girls having their first periods have been starting earlier and earlier. So it's really
Right.
interesting to think about this shift. I talked to my mom about her experience with perimenopause, and she said it was definitely like a solid 5 years before she went through menopause that she had some pretty debilitating symptoms, especially those hot flashes, those night sweats, those mood swings, things like that. And so here I am, I started what I pretty confidently believe was my transition at 37. So it's interesting to kind of think about. No, I 100% believe perimenopause is real. I do believe very firmly that there are a lot of things that we can do holistically, with diet and lifestyle first, and then some targeted supplements. There are some really cool herbal kind of tinctures out there that can help. We don't have to suffer for years and years. But I do think that if you head into this transition with your cycle in a good place and your hormones
Yeah.
in a good place, it's all going to be a lot easier. I firmly, firmly believe that. And I just wish that more women would pay attention to their cycle and care about their cycle more outside of getting pregnant. Because most women
Yes.
in my life, they don't think about it, or they hate it, they dread
Right.
it. And they only start to pay attention when they're trying to get pregnant. And it's such a
So
bummer
true.
because, again, it's our fifth vital sign. And if we can optimize it before this massive hormonal shift, everything will be a little bit easier.
Something I'm so excited about is, thought leaders like you in the fertility awareness method space. Like, we're going to be leading the next generation of girls. I
Yep.
have a daughter too, with this type of education because, as a girl who was, or as a woman who was born in 1990, the culture was very much in the late 90s and 2000s, like scented Tampax
Oh
tampons,
gosh, yes.
hormonal birth control to balance your hormones. I can't wait to do away with that and just have a totally blank slate with my daughter. And
Great.
I'm really curious to dig into that with you. Like, how do you plan on teaching this? Like, when do you plan on teaching this to your daughter? But
Hmm.
I want to, before going into that, okay, so you know how we're against hormonal birth control for all sorts of reasons,
Hmm.
but it's often prescribed when, like girls are teenagers or go through
Hmm.
puberty. So, what do you think about hormone replacement therapy being normalized for women going through menopause?
I think that unfortunately, there was a study done that has been completely debunked around the risks of hormone replacement therapy and an increased risk of breast cancer. And again, it's been debunked. And there is definitely a very big difference between bioidentical hormone replacement therapy, which is not synthetic hormones. That's very different than hormonal birth control. Two different worlds. I do think there is a time and a place for bioidentical hormone replacement therapy when a woman's quality of life is suffering tremendously.
Okay.
I do not believe the same with hormonal birth control because the problem with hormonal birth control is they are synthetic hormones. Our body does not take them in the same way that they do like a bioidentical estrogen patch, things like that. And I'm always going to recommend the lowest dose of hormone replacement therapy. And again, like this isn't, oh, my cycles are getting a little wonky. Like, should I get an estrogen patch? No, no. We need to justify it. But when I think about hormonal birth control and the way that it's used to like treat, quote unquote symptoms when it actually doesn't treat anything, it's just
Right.
masking symptoms, leaving the root cause to worsen. And when I think about the fact that people love to talk about the breast cancer risk of hormone replacement therapy, which again has been debunked, but no one's talking about the breast cancer risk with hormonal birth control, which is very, very well documented. It is classified as a type 2 carcinogen from the IARC,
Yeah.
and then we think about like the increased risk, lifetime increased risk of depression and suicidality over 100% when
Yeah.
young girls start hormonal birth control, particularly within the first 2 to 3 years of starting their cycle. So it's like, it's interesting to me to watch a lot of providers villainize hormone replacement therapy and not hormonal birth control when the
So
risks
true.
are so much more pervasive and again well documented with
Right.
hormonal birth control.
Yeah,
So,
it's funny about the breast cancer risk and hormonal birth control not being discussed a lot because that was actually one of the only side effects that my mom warned me about because breast cancer does run on my
oh wow.
maternal lineage. So she knew about that before, social media or anything. And she's like, I don't want you going on this because breast cancer runs in our family. So she was telling me that doctors, weren't saying that. But yeah, aside from hearing it from my mom or like you, I'm not hearing it from anyone else
Yeah.
really. Okay, so you briefly mentioned vasectomies earlier. We have to talk about this. There is a theory that, it is removing the man's life force energy. So this is a little bit spiritual, but it's a little bit literal too and biological.
Yeah. No, I
There's there's an idea like semen is only there for the purpose of procreation, but so if that isn't the point anymore, then why should a man need it, right? Like why not
mhm.
just do that? If he's okay with the procedure, it's within their budget, informed consent was given. So, barring all of that aside, why might it be concerning to remove a man's life force energy? And also, isn't there a risk of prostate cancer?
There are a lot of risks, honestly, and there's not a lot of education around it. And again, I think vasectomies are having a moment right now
Yeah.
because women are kind of wisening up to the side effects of hormonal birth control. They don't want to be on it. I don't know if you have watched the show Love is Blind. Don't judge me.
Yes. No, I love it.
I only recently got into it, but there have been 2 seasons where the topic of hormonal birth control has come up and the ignorance around like these men like having no idea that, their fiancés don't want to go on hormonal birth control because of all of the side effects. And the men are like, there's side effects? It's like, well,
Oh,
duh.
God.
But anyways, so I think vasectomies are having this moment. I know in my community, the hospital that does them most frequently, it's like a year wait list. And so I think we
Jeez.
think of it as like, oh, I don't have to go on birth control. There's no hormonal, side effects. But to me, what you said about like semen is only, or like sperm are only necessary for procreation, that made me think about the way that we approach and view cervical mucus in the same way.
Right.
Like, oh, we don't need, or like our periods. How many providers truly believe that we don't need to have a period every month? We don't need to have a cycle
Most
every
of
month.
them.
There's no point, right? I liken it to that. There is absolutely a need for us to have a period. This is how our bodies were designed to function. We are shutting down our reproductive systems with no knowledge of how that's impacting us. And again, we're doing it to 11 and 12-year-old girls who are so vulnerable with their hormones. I think of sperm and semen the same way. This is a biologically normal thing for men. Of course, there are going to be side effects when we shut it down and prevent it from working the way it's supposed to. So I think we just have to stop thinking that it's just like this really easy kind of outpatient in and out. There's no risks. There's obviously risks of like blood clots. There's obviously risks of the procedure not working. Like my midwife has said it before, like my home birth midwife has a lot of clients who got pregnant from after their partner got a vasectomy, and like it doesn't always work perfectly. People think it's like really easily reversible. That's not always the case. So it is not something like, to me, it's kind of like the male birth control that's kind of starting to get a little more funding around the research. Like, I would never want my husband to get a vasectomy. I would never want my husband to go on the male birth control.
Same. To me, that's just like a science experiment.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I also hear this topic. I don't know if this is a part of like third wave feminism or a backlash from it, but it's like, well, I had to carry the baby for 9 months and, all women the only option we had was hormonal birth control, da da da. So it's only fair if he gets the vasectomy. I'm like, we shouldn't be lowering our standards to that to begin with. Why are we doing this weird tit for tat? Like, I don't like this 50-50 conversation. How about neither of you should have to get your tubes tied or get a vasectomy or birth control pills?
Agree.
You know,
I couldn't agree more.
It's like, I know, let's choose like the less shitty option out of two options. What if there's an even better method?
And I know that pregnancy can be really hard for women, and I know that birth can be really traumatic, but like as someone who has a baby like moving inside of them, like I don't know how anyone could not see this as like a miracle.
Yes.
I'm literally creating life inside of my body. It is a blessing. It is a gift. No, I'm not going to be like, oh, my husband has to do this because I have to go through this, or I have to get periods every single month. And I don't know. I couldn't agree with you more. It's such a weird reason to try to like push your partner into this. But to be honest, like when you mentioned like the prostate cancer, I know there's been some talk about like an increased risk of autoimmune disease, cardiovascular disease, sexual dysfunction, the prostate cancer. There's not a ton of evidence, but also there hasn't been a ton of really conclusive research done. So it's kind of like how for years we touted cigarettes as safe.
Yeah.
We just didn't have the research yet, or like hormonal birth control. So we also just need more funding and more research. But when I think intuitively about like what we're doing, I would not be surprised if those risks were real and valid. And I just think that we have to stop assuming that vasectomies are just, it's fine. They're in and out. There's no risk. And yeah.
Yeah. How are you planning on teaching your daughter and maybe future daughters? Because I know you don't know the gender yet.
Yeah.
So what are you going to be leaving behind in the past? But like more importantly, how are you going to teach them? At what age is it age appropriate to talk about, planning and preventing pregnancy, the birth control conversation? Because, even if let's say they're at a forest school when they're older or homeschooled or whatever, they're going to encounter other kids where it is normal for these girls in the mainstream world to be put on birth control. So just tell us all the ammo you're going to give your daughters with this education.
My biggest goal is to prevent my daughter from ever feeling shame around her body. And that includes her cervical mucus. That includes her period. I think, my mom did her best. She definitely talked to me about my period. I remember when I first got my period, we went and we bought this rose bush and planted it, and it was like this big deal. But never did she talk to me about anything else, especially my cervical mucus, especially pregnancy stuff. And in my school, we did have sex ed, but it was a joke. And it basically taught me that you can get pregnant any day of your cycle. And that was, that's what I learned.
Same.
So my mom did her best. But like, to be honest, it's like, did my mom understand this? Because I can tell you, Catherine, I didn't understand this until I was 30. Right. 30 years old is when I started to actually understand my cycle, what was happening with my hormones, what cervical mucus is. And I think about being in middle school and I have so many visceral memories of going to the bathroom and seeing white stuff on my underwear and having no idea why it was there.
Same.
And like some days why it wasn't there. So that's my biggest goal. I don't want my daughter to feel shame. I don't want her to ever hide a tampon up her sleeve, so boys don't see that she's on her period. I don't ever want her to call it, Aunt Flo, because we can't say period as if it's like a swear word.
Right.
So that's my biggest goal. And I've already started. Obviously,
That's
I'm not
incredible.
producing, like fertile cervical mucus right now. But from the time she was, honestly, before 2, she was in the bathroom with me. And again, I got my period back really soon postpartum. So she was there for a lot of cycles. And she asked me like what my, the stuff I was picking up and stretching was. And I told her. And I remember she always used to be like, it looks like an egg. It looks like snot. I'm like, yeah, pretty much that's what it looks like. So she already knows when I get my period, it's not a bad thing, and it's like, she's almost 4. I keep it very age appropriate. I say when mommy bleeds from her vagina, it's a good thing. It means that mommy is healthy. And it's not something that like you have to worry about for a long time.
So
as she gets older, my goal is probably around 8. Unfortunately, because a lot of girls are getting their periods sooner, which I'm hoping that we can avoid when we think about like diet and lifestyle. I think that's a huge factor that a lot of moms don't understand. I was just talking to a girlfriend who has 3 daughters, and her daughter is about to turn 12. And she was like, I just feel really happy that she hasn't gotten her period yet, like most of her friends.
Yeah.
She's like, she's had a childhood, and I feel really good about the like nutrition choices I've made, the lifestyle choices I've made. It makes me so happy. But anyways, we can't deny that some girls are getting their periods a lot earlier.
Yeah.
My goal is around 8 to start talking a little bit more about what's coming, what a period is, what cervical mucus is. And luckily, I'm actually trained in hosting period positivity parties.
It's awesome.
Yeah, I did a training with that a year and a half ago or so, and it's such a passion project for me. So I have a I have an arsenal of things. I have a plush vulva.
Oh, I love it.
So, and she already knows that she has a vulva. She already knows she has labia. Like, using these correct terms, because I don't know about you, but I grew up hearing boys have a penis and girls have a vagina, and that's it.
Same.
And that's
I
like
still hear it from adults.
So limiting. We have so much more. So
not even like some parents are like, that's your pee-pee. That's your wee-wee.
Please,
I'm
guys,
like, what's
we
the
have
wee-wee?
to use proper terms. Right? And again, it's like, what is it shameful? Am I not supposed to like use the word vulva? It's just so strange. But anyway, so we're kind of starting those things. But around 8 is when I typically start with the period positivity parties. So that's when I would start with my daughter. And to be honest, if I have a boy, which my daughter really wants a sister, and she is adamant that this baby is a girl. But if it is a boy, I plan on doing the same thing, because we have to normalize this for them too, right?
So you wouldn't change anything about the education, whether it's a girl or a boy that you're teaching?
No, I want him to know what a period is. I want him to know what cervical mucus is, like what a women's cycle means. Like, they're not getting the education either. And when I think about fast forwarding to like couples in their 20s, 30s, like, men should understand what we're going through, you guys. Men should know that we are not like them. They have a circadian rhythm. They wake up every morning the same exact person. We don't. We have an infradian rhythm. Our hormones shift. That changes our energy. That changes our mood. That changes our disposition. That changes our libido. They should know this. And like, my husband definitely does. They should know where we're at in our cycle. They should know if we are in our fertile window, because it takes 2 to prevent pregnancy. So I'll get off my soapbox. But yes, I think it's important for little boys to grow up and have this stuff normalized too. So as she starts to get older, like I have like a period prep kit that I'll make for her, so she can always have it with her. So if we do plan to homeschool, but if she is like at core school or like a co-op, like, she's ready, and there's not that fear of like, oh my God, I'm going to start bleeding on my white shorts, or, I remember having that anxiety as a little girl.
Yes.
And so for initially, the goal is not going to be pregnancy prevention. The goal is not going to be to educate around that. But as she gets older, like into her teen years, like, we will absolutely talk about that. I want to be a very sex positive family. Again, I don't want there to be shame around this, but I also want her to understand, like, her body is a vessel. It's very important. It's very magical. So we'll have a lot of talks around that. But then eventually, I absolutely do want her to understand how to prevent pregnancy, especially if we reach a point that she expresses interest in hormonal birth control. It's hard to wrap my head around, like, what if she wants to go on it? And I think all I can do is educate her on the risks, because no one ever did with me. I was on it for over a decade. I never knew what it was doing to my body. Educate her on how it's actually working, Like
Yeah.
when I was on the pill and I got that bleed, that withdrawal bleed, I thought that was a period. I thought it was a true period, which it wasn't, right? Because I wasn't
Right.
ovulating, but I had no idea. And so all I can do is give her all of the information and encourage her to make an empowered choice, but also I want her to know that there is another way to prevent pregnancy. So there is a really cool company called Teena, Teena. So if any of your listeners have older girls, it's a basal body temperature thermometer app specifically for teens. And it's just a really good kind of introduction into the world of BBT, what it means, how to track it. So I think that's really cool. But I just hope that she can feel empowered, and I hope that she can feel excited when she gets her first period and not dread it.
Yes.
Like so many of us did, and even so many of our moms did. And I hope women understand that like their views of their body, their views of their period drastically impact their daughters. So like when we talk about how much we hate it or how awful it is, you know, that stuff matters and our language matters. So I'm hoping that just when she sees, because I don't know, like when I was cycling before I got pregnant, like I would always feel happy when I got my period because I knew that my body was healthy, especially when my cycles started getting wonky. I would feel elated when I was confirming ovulation, even though it was happening really late in my cycle. I knew that my body was still healthy. So I'm hoping I can pass that down to her, but I'm just hoping that when she knows there's an option to prevent pregnancy, whether that's when she's 18, whether that's when she's married, whenever that is, I just hope that she knows that when there is a valid option to avoid pregnancy without synthetic hormones, that is the choice she will make.
Yeah, I definitely think she will, since you are her mama and you're already doing all this wonderful education and modeling for her. When I look back on like sex ed and, you know, birth control ed growing up, I just feel resentful that it was so watered down and dumbed down for us, because I too, for years and years, thought you could get pregnant any day of the month. And then the irony when you actually have to track and, you know, wait, like, it's not that easy.
No.
I don't just become pregnant instantaneously.
Right.
That is really interesting. Speaking of getting periods early, I have a story for you. So I assumed I would get my period at like 13, give or take. My mom was 13 or 14 when she got hers.
Wow.
We ate all organic. And this was like before it was cool or in the know.
Yeah.
Like all organic, especially with dairy products, because of all the antibiotics and the hormones in the dairy. I was shocked when I got my period at 10, because we had a very healthy lifestyle and diet. Everything was homemade, again, organic, blah, blah, blah. And no hormonal issues. So the only thing I can think of, and I want to hear your take, my dad's middle sister got hers at 10. This was in 1967. Not the older sister, just the middle one. I am part Hispanic on that side, and I have heard that if you're Black or Hispanic, you have a tendency to get it earlier, but I don't know if that's correlation or causation. Like, is that because it happens to be also with like a certain lifestyle that's triggering that, or is it due to genetic biomarkers? I don't know. Part Colombian, so yeah, from Latin America. But yeah, so I was shocked because I did all the right things.
Yeah.
What do you think about that? What could have caused that?
There's definitely some studies around the genetic component. So that's a very, very valid thing. And to your point, like when we look at epigenetics data, it's like, is it diet, lifestyle? Is it not? You know, and I don't think we'll ever know conclusively 100%, but there are 100% genetic pieces that impact how early you get your period. Yes. So I would imagine that was definitely a part of your journey.
Yes, because I figured, it'll be when my mom did. But sometimes it can be the dad's mom's side.
Yep. It's kind of like what genes went out.
Yeah.
10 is not as concerning to me as like 7, which is like what's happening. So
it's
like that is
terrifying.
That is so scary. And you think about like that's a baby. You know, like
who can get pregnant?
Baby.
Like a third grader can be pregnant. It's just very disturbing and alarming.
And then what we're not doing is we're not educating parents. And you know, I don't know if it needs to be pediatricians. I don't know who it needs to be, but someone needs to educate parents that when your daughter does get her period, it's going to be irregular for a while. Because what happens is they'll get a period and then maybe they don't get another one for a while. And then they start to get some acne. And what do? They go to their doctor. They get put on the pill. Yeah. Regulate, when actually it's not regulating anything. It's shutting it down during a hugely vulnerable time for their hormones. So we just need a lot more education around what's normal, when a girl gets their period, what's not normal, what's cause for concern, and how to help them deal with cramps, which can be very typical in the beginning, without popping ibuprofen all the time.
Yeah.
We have to do so much better for this generation. We really do.
Yes. But unfortunately, it's going to put a lot of OBs not out of business because they're still making money in other ways, So you just have to look at, where's the money? So what's
Yep.
the incentive for schools and OBs to teach fertility awareness method, but also they're not being trained on it in school,
No,
right?
absolutely not. No, when I talked to my OB about coming off of birth control, but we weren't trying to get pregnant, she laughed in my face, and I don't see her anymore, if you're wondering.
Yeah.
And then she told me, I'll see you back in 6 months when you're pregnant, start taking a prenatal. And I was it's almost a blessing that she did that, because it made me so determined, no way, I'm going to figure this out. I'm going to figure out how to prevent pregnancy. And honestly, it's not difficult. It's really not.
Yeah.
I think people are intimidated, and yes, there's a learning curve, because I liken it to learning a new language. If you have only spoken English for 35 years and then you try to learn Italian, of course there's going to be a learning curve, because you've only ever spoken English. It's the same thing with your body. There's going to be a learning curve as you start to learn how to read your body signals, but it's not difficult. And I would say on average, 3 cycles is really all it takes for a woman to kind of get a method and feel confident with a method. And it's not hard. It takes me, a minute every day, to check my cervical mucus, track my BBT. That's it. It's not difficult at all. So
Right.
yeah.
We're used to, I think what's going on is we are in a high efficiency, high productivity state where we're trying to always optimize. I don't have a minute to do this. I don't have 3 minutes, whatever.
I know.
We're so used to outsourcing everything to someone else, or just purely technology, which means we've sort of have this severed intuition. So speaking of which, to me, I love to check cervical mucus as one of the biomarkers. But the other biomarker is also reaching inside, feeling for the sensation of your cervix. Is it hard? Is it soft? Is it high? Is it low? From what I recall, that isn't your favorite way to test things, right?
It's not that it's not my favorite. It's just, it wouldn't be where I would recommend starting.
Okay.
I would always recommend starting with cervical mucus. And then, like I said, you have to decide, do you want to just do mucus, or do you want to add in BBT? Do you want to add in the hormone, monitoring at home with Clear Blue? To check your cervix, which you're right, it does change. It sits higher and lower. It opens and closes. It actually tilts. So when we're infertile, it tilts back slightly towards our rectum. When we're fertile, it straightens, because again, our bodies are very intuitive. Whether we want to get pregnant or not, they want to every cycle.
Yeah.
So it straightens out so that the sperm can get up a little bit easier. So the only reason I don't recommend it initially is because you have to be very consistent. You have to check every single day. And the changes can be very subtle. So where I see checking your cervix as helpful as an optional third biomarker is if you're postpartum. That's a wonderful time to use it, because things can be really wonky. Maybe, some women have continuous mucus postpartum. Some women have no mucus postpartum. If you are on certain medications, including antihistamines, you may not produce a lot of finger testable cervical mucus, right? So that's the mucus that actually comes down. You can observe it at your vulva. You can usually pick it up off of tissue paper and stretch it. You might not see that a lot. And so if you don't, going up there can be really helpful. Now, what a lot of women will do is they'll do these internal checks and kind of scoop around and pull down mucus and then stretch that. That is not what I personally recommend. And that is not the rules with my method. And I would say most methods, unless, again, you're someone that doesn't get a lot of mucus observations at your vulva. And then perhaps we can go to that. That can be confusing for women, because we're never going to be dry as a bone in our vaginal canal.
Right.
There's always going to be something. And a lot of the month when we're not fertile, we'll just kind of grab this vaginal cell slough, which if you think we shed skin cells every day, we shed hair follicles every day. We also shed cells within our vaginal canal. There can be a lot of confusion where women are oh, this is mucus, I'm fertile, but it's not. So I just think that if you're interested in tracking, let's get you really confident with cervical mucus first, with external checks. Decide if you want to add in BBT or a Clear Blue monitor, whatever that is. And then I think cervix can be an optional, third biomarker if you're struggling to confidently identify your fertile window.
When women say that they're on an IUD, but it's non-hormonal, what do you think about that? Do you think that there's any side effects to that hormonally, even though they say it's a non-hormonal IUD?
I sure do. And I would never, never go on it. So the copper IUD, unfortunately, a lot of women in the more natural holistic space, they go on it because there are no synthetic hormones. But we have to remember that the copper IUD literally works by causing inflammation. That's how it works, right? And when we think about inflammation and systemic inflammation in our body, it is absolutely impacting our hormones.
Right.
It's also impacting our gut. It's also impacting our brain. Like, we want as little inflammation in our bodies as possible. And most of us have too much already because of our lifestyle, stress, all the things. So the most common, very well studied side effects of the copper IUD are heavier and more painful periods. And why is
Perfect.
that? Because of the inflammation that it's causing. So
Right.
no, I would never personally use it. And I think it stinks that so many women go to it because they're cognizant of not putting synthetic hormones into their bodies. And they think
Right.
it's like this great option. And then they're miserable with these heavy, painful periods. Or they're dealing with other, issues with inflammation. Like I said, gut issues, skin issues, right?
Yes.
And then there's also a small but studied risk of copper toxicity. So,
Totally. Oh my goodness. So
yeah,
it's like we're trying to cure the issue and then we're causing more problems. It just
yeah.
intuitively, I don't want any device in there. Like I've never had an IUD. I will never
I
get
had
an
one.
IUD.
It was awful. It was awful. And
My
I'm
God.
so mad because my OBs love IUDs, right? Because
Right.
there's no user error. A lot of
Yep.
women don't take the pills correctly, especially the mini pill. The mini pill, oh, it makes me so mad. The mini pill is prescribed so heavily postpartum, and providers aren't saying, hey, you have to take this at exactly the same time every day. Exactly
Like
the
to
same
the
time.
minute, you mean?
Literally, like maybe within like 5-10 minutes. But
Okay.
yes, because otherwise it is not going to work.
Oh my God.
And when you think about postpartum, think about those early postpartum like
It's a
months. You
blur.
are in a fog. You are in a fog.
Yeah.
There is no physical way that I would remember to do that. And so a lot of women end up pregnant on the mini pill. Anyways,
Jeez.
yeah. So, oh no, I just lost my train of thought. What were we
Oh,
just
so
talking about?
so IUD and in the holistic
Oh yeah.
community. So they're taking
So
these.
IUDs, OBs love IUDs because
Yeah.
there's no user error.
Right.
And it's, you put it in once, it can last for 3 years, it can last for 5 years. I think some of them now are up to 10 years. It's kind of crazy.
There's no way that's natural to have a copper device in your body by your reproductive organs for 10 years and they're getting
Yeah.
dislodged. Sometimes they're
Well,
not even working. Why are they not working?
the hormonal ones for sure aren't always working, and those can become dislodged so easily. But I went on the hormonal one because my OB was, she sold it to me. I think I was like, I don't know, 28. And she was like, you wouldn't have to take the pill every day. There's less side effects, like it's safe, it's long term. And so I did the 3-year one, and it was the most excruciating pain I've ever been in my life. It honestly
Wow.
rivals like childbirth or even my hemorrhoids after childbirth. Like, that's how bad it was.
Wow.
And I remember her telling me like, oh, just pop some Advil. And it's like, what? And then I think about like vasectomies and how like men are, treated so differently than women with IUDs. And there's a push now for like more medical management around IUD insertion, especially if you do it before you give birth, because your cervix is a little more closed, right? It's not going to be as soft as if you get it after birth. But it was excruciating. And I'm very grateful that I only had the one and didn't get it again. But I think a huge side effect, besides all of the hormonal side effects, right? Like the increased risk of breast cancer, the increased risk of depression, low libido, mood swings, blah, 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 is scar tissue forming that can actually impact your fertility journey.
Right. So especially like let's say you've had a C-section already. So you're dealing with that scar tissue. Now you have potential scar tissue forming from the insertion of the IUD, right? And then you're going to think you have unexplained infertility when really it's just inflammation.
Yep.
Your OB's not going to know this or tell you. You're going to be medicated and maybe you're
Yep.
going to do like IVF or some kind of procedures when
Absolutely.
maybe it was just the scar tissue to begin with, which was
Yeah.
preventable.
Yep. And maybe it was the synthetic hormones that, by the by, can stick around in your body for many, many months after you stop hormonal birth control. Like, no one's talking to us about that, and how much that can impact our ovulation, getting pregnant. Like, my best advice, if anyone is still on birth control and they plan on starting a family soon or expanding their family soon, is get off way sooner than you think you need to. Because your cycle, you might get off and you might ovulate right away, right? That happens. We know that. But it also might not happen. It might take many months for not only for you to ovulate, but for your cycles to become regular and healthy so that you can get pregnant. So I think about that all the time. Like, how many women are being pushed to IUI and IVF because they simply have not given their bodies enough time to regulate after hormonal birth control.
All the
But
time.
to your
All the
point,
time.
follow the money, right? It's a very
Yes.
lucrative business.
I'm really excited to see like what is going to be the trend that shifts with all the holistic moms, not the IUD holistic side, but like
Yeah.
the let's just do fertility awareness method. Like what happens if we can teach this en masse to our daughters? So is your husband as like knowledgeable about fertility awareness method and all the biomarkers as you are?
He's definitely not as knowledgeable, but he got a lot of education from me when I was
Good.
learning because I was just nerding out so much. Like I needed to talk to someone about it, especially like the first few months that I tracked my cervical mucus. Like I would show him, I would tell him, he would know if I were in my fertile window, he would know when I was about to get my period. I just think it's been really helpful for our marriage because he can understand like, oh, she's maybe a little less like patient and maybe a little more
Right.
quick to like snapping, like, oh, she's gonna get her period soon, like let me give her a little bit of
Yeah.
grace. Or like he would know that a fun extravagant date night like the day before I get my period is just not the vibe I'm gonna want to sit on the couch and relax. And so I think it's been really helpful. But he didn't want to add to our family right away after having my daughters. So like I wanted him to take some ownership of that because it's not fair
Right.
to put pregnancy prevention just on the woman when we're only fertile 6 days a month. Men can get women pregnant every day of the month. So I wanted him
Yes.
to be aware. But I do remember one time he was like, "Can you not talk to me about cervical mucus at dinner?" And I was like, "Okay, that's fair.
That is
That's a
totally
fair boundary."
something. That's so something that Eric would do too. He's like totally fine with that, but like
Yeah.
we can't talk about it when there's food
No,
in
and
front of
that's
us.
fair. But I just was so excited. That's honestly why I went back to school and like completely
Yeah.
pivoted my career. I used to work in special education, and I was in a school, and I was like, I could not stop talking about cervical mucus and fertility awareness methods when I started learning. And my friends got annoyed with me, and they were like, I remember my friends were like, "Wait, you're not trying to get pregnant, but like you got your IUD out?" Like they thought I was like nuts. And now here I am, 8 years later, I've made a
Yes.
career out of it, and I've again successfully avoided pregnancy. Only getting pregnant twice when planned. First cycle I tried. And
Yep.
I know a lot of women will tell me that's luck, but I know for a fact that it was at least a contributing factor how well I knew my body and how I knew exactly when I was fertile.
Absolutely. So the fertility awareness method has what, like a 98%, 99% efficacy rate?
Yeah, it
Something like
depends
that?
on exactly which method, but definitely up to like 99.6%. Now, the one thing with efficacy with FAM or fertility awareness methods is it's ultimately up to you, right? Like
Okay.
you could read Taking Charge of Your Fertility or you could take lessons from an instructor, but we're not in your house reminding you to check on you, before and after you go to the bathroom, reminding you to take your BBT. So there's a lot of motivation kind of at play in the efficacy. But yes, when used perfectly, most methods are up to 99.6% effective.
I was going to ask your opinion on the 0.4% where it's not working, but it's probably because it's self reported. So if you think you're doing everything right, but maybe you didn't get counseling from someone like you, this is your first go around, maybe you're not doing everything to a T. Or are there other factors like, oh my gosh, someone actually did everything perfectly, but why are they in the 0.4% and they're getting pregnant? What do you think that's about?
It could be something as small as like their cervical mucus, like they were doing external checks and they didn't have a lot one day, so it didn't actually like come down the vaginal canal, right? It could be something like that. It could be something like, I mean, as if they were doing it perfectly, that means they're paying attention to sensation before and after they go to the bathroom with wiping. Because while cervical mucus opens your fertile window, there can also be a more subtle change, which is that change in wiping sensation. So that would have to be kind of important at play as well. It could be that they have shorter cycles, which means like often they could be ovulating a little bit earlier. But most of the documented like pregnancies, and again, there's not going to be as much research on FAM as there is on hormonal birth control. And the
Yeah.
efficacy studies, to your point, are self-reported. So it's not going to be as much of a perfect science as like, IUDs and things like that. But there definitely is a piece to be said about that consistency. What I have seen with some of my clients who've been doing this for years is they start to get a little bit complacent, because let's say they always ovulate between day 12 and day 17, right? So there's like maybe a window there. And then like they start to become a little bit complacent. So it is something where you have to be motivated to stay consistent with it. And for me, the motivation has been expanding our family when and only when we're ready. And that has been big. So like I am very, very motivated to check every single day and be consistent. There are also different rules around unprotected intercourse on your period and whether or not there's risk there. And that will kind of depend on the length of your past cycles, the earliest date that you've ovulated. So it can be a little bit nuanced. But I know with my method, like we encourage anyone who's learned to report unintended pregnancies, both to your instructor and to the college, so that they can, you know, factor those into kind of their reports on their end and decide, was it user error, was it teacher error, or was it method error?
Right. When you said the thing about taking antihistamines and that, how that can make it seem like there's less cervical mucus, I'm thinking about all those things that maybe women don't take into account. I'm also thinking like, don't like abstinence only sex ed in schools, but because you do have to be very intrinsically or self-motivated, you do have to be mature and consistent. I can unfortunately see how there's some fear around teaching this to, let's say, a 16-year-old, especially if they're partying, drinking alcohol. And it's like, God, I don't want the birth control to be the blanket solution, but it's like, okay, condoms then.
Yes,
we don't need to be on birth control. Let's do condoms
Agreed.
Until you're mature enough and self-motivated enough to actually follow the rules and not be wasted when you're doing this.
Right.
I know we're a little bit up on time, but just real quick, withdrawal method. Do you like it? Do you think it's bad?
The withdrawal method, it relies on a lot of self-control from the man. So there's two things with the withdrawal method. And typically with my clients, so when you're in your fertile window, you kind of have to decide with your partner what you're comfortable doing. So to use a fertility awareness method perfectly, you're going to abstain from all vaginal intercourse. That's anything where semen can get in contact with your vulva during your fertile window. And we call it kind of like a potential fertile window that might be longer than your biological fertile window because you might have more than 5 days of cervical mucus. Even though the 5 days leading up to ovulation are what can lead to pregnancy, you may have more than that. So just kind of keep that in mind. But either way, whenever your fertile window opens, the way to use a method perfectly is to abstain from vaginal intercourse. From there, it's up to your comfort level with risk and where you fall on the intention scale. So it's kind of like a spectrum. Are you 100% trying to avoid pregnancy because a pregnancy would cause some sort of health issue, you know, in your life and you could die? Or are you 100% trying to get pregnant? Or are you somewhere kind of in the middle, somewhere on the side? So I do a lot of counseling with that with my clients because they have to decide, you know, I can't tell them what the right answer is. A lot of couples will choose in their fertile window because unfortunately our libido is highest in our fertile window.
Yeah.
They will choose to take on the risk of a condom or the withdrawal method, or both.
Right.
That tends to be the most popular. Obviously, there's also diaphragms, female condoms, spermicides, things like that. But that tends to be the most popular. It's withdrawal and or condom. Now, to use the withdrawal method perfectly, a man must pull out completely before he ejaculates.
Right.
And that, again, takes a lot of self-control. When he does it perfectly, it can be very effective, as long as there is not sperm in his pre-cum. Okay. Now, we started to kind of freak out as a whole, fertility awareness educators years ago about pre-cum and sperm. What research has actually, because now we're actually researching it, what research has actually found is it's very unlikely for a man to have sperm in his pre-cum unless he ejaculated recently. So if you're like going on an all-night bender, you know, maybe you're dating someone young who can like go 2 times in a row, that second time, there is a pretty good chance that he could have sperm in his pre-cum.
Wow, moms, you got to hear this, okay? Tell your husband, like, you've been warned, because I'm hearing about women getting pregnant from withdrawal method. But also I'm like, how do condoms fail? Am I missing something? Are there people poking holes in them? It seems pretty bulletproof to me.
I know.
Like, what's going on?
So actually, a lot of the errors with condoms are improperly putting them on, which always makes me think of the scene in Mean Girls where they're like trying to put them on a banana. But a lot of people don't leave enough room in the tip.
Oh my God, that's
so
what
then
it
actually like leaks out a little. Yeah. And they can break. I mean... You know, you think about manufacturing errors, that does happen. And that's really unfortunate and really scary, which is why I will tell you, like, a lot of my clients, if they're really, really strongly trying to avoid pregnancy, they will use withdrawal and a condom. But again, he's got to pull out before. And sometimes it sneaks up on him. So the withdrawal method can be a valid choice, but I would just be aware of the risk, especially, like I said, if he has ejaculated recently.
I like all the nitty gritty you're discussing. It's not just, like the high level stuff that we see on social media. Like, okay, this is why withdrawal is not working. Now we have like a crystal clear idea. What are your favorite condom brands?
So unfortunately, condoms are like completely unregulated because they're considered medical devices. And a lot of them have some really sketchy things that can disrupt your vaginal pH. So I'm very picky. I would say my favorite have been Lola. Lola is like a clean period brand too. They have a lubricant as well that I like. I really liked Sustain. I just learned, unfortunately, that they stopped making them, which really stinks.
No way. Those were my favorite. And I know it was the founder, the father-daughter founder originally of Seventh Generation, and then they went on to make that company. Then I saw that they were being sold through Grove, and I was like, I don't want to get a subscription for Grove just to get Sustain, and now they don't make them at all.
They stopped making them. Yeah, so you can still get them some places. Lola's good. I like PS, and I like Glide. Those are some off the top of my head, GLYDE, that are a little bit safer. You definitely don't want the Trojans, that you can buy at CVS. No. And please don't get the ones with like the flavors in them. Like, I know. God. I know. And then women are like, why am I getting yeast infections so much? And I'm like, well, what are you putting in your vagina?
Right. Oh my gosh. I don't know if any crunchy moms are going to get the flavors of the Trojans, but you never know.
I hope not. You
never know.
There's also like the scented lubes and the flavored lubes. And I'm like, no.
Bizarre.
Yeah. And then remember with latex condoms, you want to use the water-based lubricant only. Just pro tip.
Okay, good tip. Now, all right, before we officially wrap, what is one piece? I'm like, don't go.
I know. I can talk about this stuff all day.
Hours and hours, right? What is your, like, if you just had to choose one piece of your least favorite, let's see, I was going to say pregnancy advice, but I want to make it pregnancy prevention advice that you haven't discussed yet. And then what is your favorite fam tip that most people don't know about? So first is least favorite pregnancy prevention advice.
So I would say where I see a lot of women going wrong, unfortunately, is they find accounts like mine or similar accounts. There's a lot of women out there that are trying to educate around this stuff, and they think, oh, okay, I can check my cervical mucus. I can use a BBT or maybe a temp drop. I love temp drop. It's a wearable basal body thermometer. It makes tracking a lot easier, especially if you're up in the night, if you don't wake up at the same time each day. And so they get off their birth control, or maybe they don't go back on postpartum, and they think that they're doing everything right just by tracking. Yep. And then they get pregnant, and then they get really mad at me, and they're like, what is happening? And I'm like, well, unfortunately, you're not tracking within a standardized method with scientific rules to open and close your fertile window. It is a little bit more nuanced. And that's why, like, when women are like, no, you just have to track your fertile signs, in an app or whatever, it's like, no. No, if you're serious about pregnancy prevention, you need to choose a standardized scientific fertility awareness method and follow that method's rules perfectly. And then the other piece that I would say that is so pervasive and it kills me is that breastfeeding is birth control. It is just, It's not like full stop. And I know you recently had a whole episode about this. It's not birth control for everyone. Right. And I think the scariest thing out there, because, we're not taught about this stuff, is women assume that they can't get pregnant until they get that first period. And what they don't know is that you're ovulating before your first true postpartum period. There can be random bleeds, especially if you're breastfeeding. There can be withdrawal bleeds from changes in your estrogen, like if baby stops nursing as much or starts nursing a ton, right? Like you said, that's not necessarily a true period. A true period follows ovulation.
Yes.
And so women wait. I actually had a friend who recently had a scare around pregnancy, and, I was kind of counseling her through it, and it's because she hadn't gotten a period yet. She didn't have cervical mucus yet, according to her, and it's like, whew, yeah, so breastfeeding is not automatic birth control. That would definitely be another piece.
Yes.
And then what was the second piece? My best tip?
Yeah, your favorite or best fam tip that you don't often hear people talking about that you haven't mentioned yet. Maybe like a lesser known one. Yeah.
I would say a lesser known one would be, to me, a benefit of fam, which, like, okay, we talked about, like, it can be used to avoid pregnancy, achieve pregnancy, body literacy, all the things. Your period is never a surprise. That's a huge one. I feel like so many of my friends, they're like, I just got my period and it was like a week early. And I'm like, well, actually, it's not a week early. It's following ovulation. Right. So you must have ovulated a week early. Right. And it like kills me. Or like my period is late. Or they'll be out shopping and get their period. And I'm like, what? You're a grown woman. And like, it is insane to me that women don't know when their period is coming. But I guess if you're not tracking, you don't know. But I would say a huge benefit to FAM is knowing exactly how long your luteal phase is.
Yeah.
And whether you are trying to get pregnant or not, the length of your luteal phase, which if listeners don't know, that's the second half of your cycle. So the first half is your follicular phase. That's your period, all your days of cervical mucus and ovulation. That can vary in length because we don't always ovulate on the same day. So it could be shorter, it could be longer. But that luteal phase, which is the second half, so the day after you ovulate until the day before you get your next period, is an essential biomarker for your health.
Oh, yeah.
We want it to be consistent and we want it to be between 12 and 14 days optimally. And a lot of women are out there with very short luteal phases. So they ovulate and then they get their period like 7 or 8 days later. That is a massive red flag. And so to me, a huge benefit of FAM is being able to know exactly how long that luteal phase is. Because if it is short, 10 days or less, I would recommend a full thyroid panel. We know that 1 in 8 women have a thyroid disorder. Most of them are going around with it undiagnosed because their doctors only check TSH. They use way too big of a window for what's normal, or their body isn't producing enough progesterone.
Yes.
And that is critical if you are trying to get pregnant. And unfortunately, low progesterone is a huge culprit behind recurring miscarriage.
Yeah.
But it is also essential for a healthy cycle. And when we think about heading into perimenopause or just trying to optimize, again, our fifth vital sign, our menstrual cycle, we need adequate progesterone. Progesterone is a beautiful hormone, and we make most of it in our luteal phase. And if our luteal phase is short, we're not making enough. So I think that is a huge, huge benefit. So yes, you're going to know when your period is coming. Yes, you can confirm ovulation, but you can also count out your luteal phase. And if it is 10 days or less, I don't care what season of life you're in, I want you to figure out why, and I want you to address it. And that's going to do so much for your cycle.
I love that tip. That actually was me, by the way, when I was pregnant with Lucy. I was actually planning on the possibility of not carrying this pregnancy out to fruition because I was just on the cusp of luteal phase defect with a 10-day luteal phase. Got the full thyroid panel, all looked great, the full panel. And I think it was a progesterone thing because I was still very much breastfeeding and things were very irregular.
Yeah.
So had it been any lower than 10 days, that would have been, I mean, obviously 10 days was a red flag, but that would have been very risky, I think, for the pregnancy itself. So yeah, a great tips. Oh my God, this was such a fun conversation. Okay, so listeners, if you're not already following Carly, please go ahead and do so at Clean Living with Carly on Instagram. And you have your website, cleanlivingwithcarly.com?
Yep, .com. Pretty easy. Yep. So if you're ever interested in working together, I have lots of different ways to do it. So yeah, everything's on there.
Yes. Yes, you're just a wealth of knowledge when it comes to so much. Fertility awareness method. Yes, holistic living. I love your page. I'm always learning something new. Yeah, so thank you so much, and we'll talk soon.
Yes, thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely.